Professor,
Hi,
thank you
Dina.
for thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure.
I am Dina Al-Alami. I'm currently mid-career Master's in Public Administration student at the Kennedy School. I took your courses and I learned a lot. And this interview is just to share some of the takeaways and learnings from your
Wonderful.
leadership framework.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with the framework. How did you come up with it? The technical versus adaptive leadership.
I think the key experiences, we each have rich experiences in our lives. The challenge is to reflect on those experiences and think deeply about those experiences to capture lessons from those experiences. And I was pretty good at that as a young man. Particular experiences that were generated, that insight, were experiences as a young doctor. Because in medicine, I saw that there were many problems that were amenable to surgery. A person would come in with an illness, and you could put them to sleep, fix them up. After a period of healing, they could return to their life. And there were no adjustments they would need to make in their life except to take it slowly as they healed. But I also saw that in surgery, there were some problems that could only be fixed partially by surgery. You could put people to sleep, but you couldn't fix the whole problem. That even after they woke up, part of the problem remained active and dangerous to their health. And that part of the problem that remained active was that part of the problem that remained in the patient, in their way of life. After the patient wakes up, the surgeon would come in and routinely give the patient a checklist. You have to stop smoking. You have to change your diet and eat better food. You have to get exercise. And, you're kind of stressed out. You have to change the balance of stresses in your life and, either start to meditate or pray or do something to regulate stress. And I saw that most patients, even after coming close to death, were unable to change their life. It turned out to be easier to fix the heart than it is to change the human heart. So most people kept smoking and eating bad food and being stressed out. So I began to see, early in my medical career that there were problems that you could take off people's shoulders and fix for them, problems that were amenable to authoritative expertise that sometimes required exquisitely sophisticated systems, economic systems that would manufacture the right materials, organizational systems in the hospital, educational systems that would train the nurses and the doctors and, the specialists, each to do their part of the job so that you could stop the human heart and fix it. But we didn't have very good systems at all in place to help a person solve their part of the problem. And in fact, doctors, I felt, were neglecting that part of the work. They would call these problems of the patient unwilling to change their life compliance failures. Compliance because I told you what to do. It's your failure for not complying with my checklist.
Yeah.
Instead of calling these medical failures that I own as a physician, and now my job is how will I lead the patient to change the patient's life? So, for example, AI is very exciting right now. Some people imagine that AI will solve all problems, but I don't think so. And then in the same way that surgery won't change the human heart, there are problems that require learning. Right now, my president of the United States has cut off funding that has sustained hundreds of millions of dollars in the purchase of medication for people in Africa and other parts of the world. Now that funding is gone. They have a lot of tragedy now to hold. There will be a lot more death. Yeah. They will have to find other ways to depend on themselves because system of international development often generates dependencies.
Yes.
Instead of capacities. Those problems cannot be fixed by AI. Those problems are going to require the engagement of people being inventive, finding their own sources of resilience, innovating to develop capacities where right now they don't have those capacities. Anyway, that's where that initial idea came from. The second big idea of viewing leadership as a practice I think also came out of medicine because medicine is a practice. Just like being a teacher is a practice. Just like being a carpenter is an area of practice. It's a line of work. And I saw from the beginning as I began to read the literature on leadership that most people writing about leadership were not writing about leadership as a practice, as something you do to solve a particular set of problems. They instead viewed leadership as transactional. How do I move you? How do I mobilize you? How do I get you to trust me? How do I get you to inspire? How do I get you to do what I want you to do?
Exactly.
That's the classic notion of leadership. I have the vision And now all the rest is a sales problem.
You just want followers, yeah.
And I saw that basic notion of leadership as very, very problematic compared to a notion of leadership anchored in how does one mobilize people to solve problems that are partly technical and amenable to authoritative command, but partly non-technical that require people to learn new ways and develop new capacity.
Yes, and you push the work back to them.
Yes, and that led me to developing a distinction with my colleague, Riley Cinder, who was my original collaborator, between leadership and authority. Because as I began to see that people in positions of authority are under enormous pressure to treat all problems as if they were surgical.
Of course, technical.
As if they could be solved through authoritative expertise. Or now technological, now we'll solve it with AI. But actually, there will always be a domain of problems that remain lodged in human relationships, in human attitudes, in human histories, in human culture, in human ways of parenting and educating and relating and employing and so forth, doing business. So we needed to figure out a way of helping people realize that when you have positions of authority, you're actually under a lot of pressure not to provide leadership because you're under a lot of pressure to treat all adaptive problems, all of these cultural problems, as if they were technical. And if you go back to people and say, I can only solve part of your problem with my expertise, but part of the problem lies in your habits and your culture and your history, you're going to have to own part of the problem, bear some of the risk, and make some of your own changes.
Yes, there's always resistance.
That's not a very easy proposition to sell to one's bosses or to a board of directors or to the citizens.
Yeah, of course. What about the idea that leadership is a dangerous activity? I read it in one of your books.
Yeah.
Leadership
Well,
Online.
it's dangerous because leadership is the practice of working in the domain of problems that require changes in people's hearts and minds and relationships, what I call adaptive challenges, because that's what happens in nature. Yeah. An organism conserves most of its DNA, but some of its DNA it has to give up, and then it has to innovate to build new capacity so that it can take the best of its tradition and history into the future. And so when you're asking people to both give some of their cultural DNA up and innovate, which is frightening to people, which is fraught with failure, because most innovations don't happen fast. They require a lot of experimentation. One moves through version 1.0 and it fails, and 1.1 and it fails.
The risk.
2.0 it fails. You have to stay in the game of innovation to finally develop a successful innovation. That requires a stomach for failure. So how do you sell that to your people? And
certainty, like leaders sometimes sell
certainty. Yeah. Exactly. Leaders sell certainty, or authorities sell certainty, because it's easier to maintain your authority if you provide people with easy answers and certainty.
Yeah.
So leadership becomes dangerous when you're starting to engage people in owning problems that they don't know how to solve, that are going to demand, losses and innovation on their part, new thinking. And we see in history that there are a lot of people who've tried to provide that kind of leadership who were assassinated. Yes. From in your region, from Anwar Sadat, who said to his people, we have to find a way to live with these folks in Israel, to Yitzhak Rabin, who got assassinated for saying, we have to figure out how we're going to live with these folks.
Their ideas were not readily accepted.
They represented too significant a loss.
Yeah.
So part of the challenge we have in developing the field of leadership practice, I as a scholar, is how can we learn lessons from what Sadat or Rabin could have done differently? What mistakes did they make?
Yes.
How could they have prepared their people better and avoided assassination?
Yes.
Of
course. There's plenty of learning in that.
Yes.
Some of your alums who attended your classes have started an idea of establishing the Arab Leadership Institute.
Yes.
I want us to hear from you. What's the potential? What's the opportunity of using adaptive leadership framework in the Arab region?
Well, I think the first opportunity is that as an outsider, both as an American, and as a Jew, I'm an outsider to your cultures. Yeah. But I have a deep appreciation for every culture and for your culture. And I think as I look through history, your culture is surrounded by other cultures that have been arrogant, and that can make people in your own culture feel as if you're not doing things right. And therefore they will come in and try to take their foreign ideas and import them into your culture as if you could take a USB drive and plug it into your system and have it work. And in the field of international development, there's a long history of people with good heart, but with arrogant attitudes and a lot of money from the World Bank and the USAID and development banks in Germany and France and Britain and other places, going into other countries around the world and saying, we have the solution for you because we know the best practices. We've studied what happened in this country, so now you do it, without really coming to learn about that local culture, without building the solution out of the local culture. So they're treating these enormously adaptive challenges for each local culture that begins with the question, what are we going to honor and respect and conserve in the tradition of that culture, in the values, in the texts, in the religion, in the ways of life? What can we conserve? But also something will need to change. But as an outsider, how can I know what's going to need to change?
We have to figure it out first.
Yes. Now I can stimulate you. I can say, here's some ideas from what happened in this region and that country and this experiment over there. And this is the way the Chinese did it. And this is the way the Russians did it. Look at their mistakes. And look at the Indians and the mistakes they've made. And, and how about Singapore? And what did they do right? And look at Dubai and the extraordinary imagination there. But how did Dubai buffer its economic, turmoil in 2009 and 10 or during the pandemic? Let's look at how they adapt. And how did Abu Dhabi bail them out with their oil revenues? There's so many lessons to learn, but how to apply it to one's own culture needs to be tailor-made to that own culture.
So you hold the environment, you raise the heat,
Yes, but I try that in this theory, we try to find the minimally disruptive innovation.
Of course.
Whereas a lot of people thinking about leadership extol disruption as if it were a virtue. I think disruption's a terrible thing, but necessary sometimes. But you want to minimize the amount of disruption so that you build the innovation so that it takes root in the local culture and preserves what's still wonderful and beautiful and wise from that local culture. I think that applies around the world in the sense of respect for, and I think that ever since the Crusades, your world, particularly the Muslim world, not all Arabs are Muslim, of course, but the Muslim world has been in competition with Christian Europe for who's got the ultimate truth. I think that competition has been very dangerous and damaging, and we need to stop it and instead find ways to learn from each other. I worry about theories of leadership that are imperialistic, or that don't start with the question, what should we conserve? What's wonderful about this culture?
How to preserve life, how to collaborate.
Well, absolutely. And in your tribal systems of government, for example, in your country, in the Emirates, there's an enormous wisdom. Would you rip that up and say, okay, well, now let's just import, a Western-style democratic political system? At what cost? At what danger? I never start with that question of, this is the right way to do things, now you guys should now figure it out. We made that mistake with Russia, and look, the country imploded and went backwards. So in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell apart, whereas the Chinese were much wiser in the pacing and the sequencing of the adaptive changes in the economy, but keeping more steady the political system to provide steadiness as you were changing so much already in the economic system and economic relations. And over time, I think their political system will evolve too, but it has to evolve in their own way,
Incremental changes are sustainable. Speak to the culture.
Exactly. So I believe in evolution. I don't think Allah, God, did zero-based budgeting.
No.
But a lot of times we human beings go in with our enthusiasms. When we start to rip everything out, and then how are we going to put it back together again?
Tensions are good, but the means are, as you said.
Yes, we create more damage than we had ever imagined. So, and then I think the Arab Leadership Institute is an extraordinarily important initiative, because I think every country facing enormous adaptive pressures from a system of international global interdependence is facing enormous adaptive pressures in every realm of life, everything from education to politics and economics and so forth, health. It requires a lot of leadership to figure out, again, how to answer these three basic questions: what to conserve, what to give up, and what innovation will enable us to take the best of our tradition forward and thrive in a changing world. And so I think enabling Arab countries and cultures to develop that adaptive capacity, to capture lessons from its history of adaptability, over many, many generations, thousands of years.
Yes.
A very important contribution to the welfare of your peoples.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.